I have a great love of Rumen Microbiology. So the microbes that are in the rumen that help break down the feed and convert that feed into useful products that we then sell to consumers in the supermarket. So we've had a great search on in recent years for pasture and shrub species that can improve the efficiency of converting feed into energy in the rumen. So it's really focused around how the microbial community in the rumen, so it's just a big microbial soup that ferments the feed and converts that into products. And so when we've looked at a whole series of Australian native shrubs and also a huge variety of pastures for southern grazing systems, we've had a few that have actually shown that they produce compounds or have compounds that have the potential to reduce the amount of methane that's produced in the rumen. And any time you can reduce the amount of methane that's produced in the rumen, you're improving the efficiency of production, because that methane that the animals burp is an energy loss from the feed that they eat. So if we can capture more of that methane in the products that the animals are producing, that's a really beneficial thing. It's also, there's a dual benefit in the sense that also methane is a greenhouse gas, and so by capturing more of the methane, we're improving productivity and we're reducing the impact on the environment and greenhouse gas or global warming. So it's an important thing. So when we get down to some of those species, I can narrow it down to a collection, but two of the ones that we've probably been most interested in, there's plenty of the shrubs that have some capacity to manipulate or improve the energy efficiency in the rumen, but one in particular that we've looked at is Eremophila glabra, which is a tar bush, and it's not a big plant, but we've also found that it doesn't actually need to be a big part of the diet to actually have the effect on improving energy efficiency, which is really important when we're talking about diverse shrub mixes and diversity in the grazing systems. So it can just be there as a relatively small part of the diet, but still have an impact on how much methane is produced and how much energy we capture. On the pasture side, it's actually much more clear cut, and Bicerula is very there's definitely something about Bicerula that reduces the amount of methane that's produced in the rumen, and it is Bicerula, daylight, and then the rest of the pasture species that we've really tested. So it's a standout in terms of reducing methane production from the rumen, and we're at a point now where we've looked at these plants in the lab initially because we did a big screening, and we're now coming through and we've tested them in the animal house and seen a drop in methane production without a penalty on productivity, and that's critical. We've got no interest in plants that do not produce healthy, productive animals just for the sake of capturing more methane. So there's no point having small runts running around the paddock that are not profitable just because we're trying to reduce methane. So it's productive but profitable systems that capture more of the energy. Where animals consume feed, there's a certain amount of energy that is in that food, and the microbes, because the animal itself is not dealing directly with the feed, in fact the feed goes through this big fermentation vat first, and those microbial that microbial community converts the energy in that food into usable energy by the animal. But there's obviously losses, so there's fecal material, so some of that feed that's consumed passes out the rear end. Some of it is passed out as urine, so that's also a bit of a loss in terms of what energy is available. But a big one is methane, and so methane is a natural byproduct of that fermentation, and it's a gas that has an energy value. So as they burp that methane out, it's just energy that hasn't been captured to produce meat or wool or milk, depending on what product you're dealing with, or potentially just for the immune system. You know, there's all sorts of ways that animals use energy, and so that's really what I mean about capturing the methane. You know, the diversity of pastures or plants that are available for animals to graze is a really important part in their health, not just from having a nutritious diet, but if some of the plants in that grazing system have secondary compounds, so they're often the compounds that are produced to protect plants from predation or herbivory or grazing. Things like tannins is one that people are probably familiar with, but there are a number of secondary compounds that can have an effect on microorganisms, and since the rumen is such a microbial community, a huge diversity of microbes, anything that has the potential, like an antibiotic, to influence microbial communities, has the potential to modify and change the efficiency of that rumen. So that's one part of getting plants in the system that have useful secondary compounds, but those secondary compounds also have been demonstrated to have a drench-like effect, so on worms. So not just the rumen microbial community, but an anthelmintic or a drench type effect in reducing worm burden. So at this stage, a lot of the work has mainly been done just in the lab, looking at the impact of different plants on the development of worm larvae. But it would be, the next step is to then look at these plants, some of the key plants. Again, just like the methane story, we've got some plants that we know have the potential at least to control worms, and what we need to do is now investigate that in a paddock situation or an animal house situation, not just in a lab. But these secondary compounds are a really critical part of grazing systems that we probably haven't put enough focus on in recent times, where we've been more interested in getting bred plants. Often when plants are bred, so different varieties come out, but often one of the things that's bred out are the secondary compounds, because they can be anti-nutritional or make animals avoid them a little bit. But like anything, things in particular doses can be beneficial or toxic, and as long as you have a mix of those plants in the landscape and the animal has a chance to select those plants, then there is the potential at least to have plants that are generally improving the health of animals that are grazing those plants. So the systems in the wheat belt. So at the moment there isn't a lot of shrubs really being, or a diversity of shrubs being utilised in the wheat belt. There are some certainly focused activities around salt and salt bush, and that's been there's certainly been developments along that line, and I guess what is starting to happen a little bit, which is really encouraging, but it's taking time, as any new approach does, is planting a more diverse range of shrubs than just saltbush. And emu bush is one of those things, and again, it shouldn't be that people are just planting Eremophila glabra or this tar bush, because that in itself is probably not going to be a profitable system. But as part of a mix with saltbush and other acacias, there's a collection or a selection of plants that we think are useful to plant in mixtures to give a diverse grazing system. And I think it would be tremendous to see more activity in that area, where marginal parts of the countryside, for cropping for example, are planted to shrubs, and animals grazing those shrubs become part of that system. Bicerula is a species that is being used, a pasture legume that's being used, and could be used more broadly, but there are also definitely issues that need to be sorted out to get the management and the utilisation of that bicerula improved so that it's more profitable. But it's definitely out there. But the shrub-based systems are things that I think people are starting to become more aware of, and the benefits of them, and having this diversity of plants is a good thing. It would be difficult to say that it's widely adopted at this stage, but there are pockets of activity, and certainly through the engagement with the Wheatbelt NRM, that's where there is support and mechanisms for producers to get more information about it as well. There's a range of things that we're working on, and that the more immediate research, or relevant research I suppose, is really figuring out what it is in some of these plants that have these effects on the rumen and on worm burden, so that we can more specifically target management to make sure we get the most efficient and most healthy grazing systems for ruminants. And so that means looking at the compounds and the chemicals and exactly how they're having an impact on the animal and either the microbes in the rumen or the worms, because then we have a much more defined mechanism that we can target to get better practices, more efficient, more cost-effective ways to manage animals. And so that's sort of our immediate interest, is learning more about how these plants are doing what they do, because then we'll have better opportunities. In terms of some blue sky stuff that is much further down the path, but I think is where, you know, more the next perhaps stepwise change that we might get is we're trying to look at how the host animal's genome, so its genetics, actually influences or interacts with the rumen, the microbial genome, if you like. So the genetics of the rumen, this complex microbial ecology that's in the rumen, how those things interact. Because really, if we understand better if we understand that interaction better, then we're actually in a much better place to have the right animals producing on the right feed type and managed in the right way. That's the critical thing, is looking at that interaction between the genetics, the environment and the management to get the most improvement. If we get that right for different regions and different areas, then that's where we'll make some benefit. And understanding how the host genome and the rumen microbial genome interact and talk to each other, and how one controls the other, is a really critical part. But it's definitely blue sky. I put my hand up to that. But I think if we're not testing ourselves down that front, then, you know, I'm not quite sure where the next big breakthrough is going to come from. So we have to have a little bit of the blue sky stuff, as well as the here and now practical work that might be able to be utilised in a shorter time frame. We have tried to start as diverse as we possibly can, specifically to help or give us the highest probability of finding the best combinations of plants in a diverse grazing system for the best areas and best environment. And this whole, even if we ignore the genetics just for the moment, but it is really important that genetics by environment by management, that environment is important, because there's no silver bullet and there's no one way and no one plant and no one mix of plants, because of exactly what you're asking, and that is difference in soil types, rainfall, patterns of rainfall. So for different areas, I think the principles can still be the same. So the principles are critical to any of those systems about how we're trying to deal with something. But the choice of genotypes, the choice of species for particular environments and managed in a particular way will all have to be slightly different, and that's a challenge that we have. But as long as we've established some of those core or basic understanding of how things are interacting, then we've actually got a much better opportunity of then tweaking systems for different environments. You know, clearly, and I don't think there'd be a producer out there, but others sometimes seem to forget that a healthy animal, so one with you know, that's eating well, nutritious feed, a healthy animal is a productive animal. So these systems that may improve the gut health, so not just the rumen but also the worm burdens, those animals that are healthier will be more productive, and that's a really important advantage that some of these more diverse grazing systems can have.